Welcome back to Remnants of the Veil, Episode 18. Keaval was a young world wearing an old world's ambition, and from the command level of the Vesk Citadel, you could see exactly how the seams of it failed to meet. Warlord Veskaar stood at the long window and let the view make its argument. Below him, the yards ran to the horizon, gantries and dry docks, and the hard orange flare of cutting torches working through the night shift, because on Keaval there was always a night shift, because Keaval could not afford to let its tools cool. Cathara had 3,000 years of stone under it. Skaethal had silence so old it had become a kind of armor. Keaval had this: noise, light, the smell of hot alloy carried up 900 feet of lift shaft and into a hall that had been poured, not carved. The walls here did not hold the weapons of dead overlords. Clan Vesk had never produced one. The walls held nothing but the marks of the forms they had been cast in, and Veskaar had ordered them left that way because a smooth wall was a wall. Pretending to a history it did not have, and he would not pretend. He was the youngest of the 5 warlords by 30 years. He felt every one of those years as a thing he was owed. On the reading slate in his hand was the Vorraan Battle Record, 57 pages. He had read it 9 times. Every other warlord in the compact had read it too. That was the point of a battle record that had entered the archive and lay there for every rival to study, and Veskaar knew with the cold certainty of a man who has been laughed at exactly how they had read it. They had read it as his failure. Warlord Veskaar filed a claim on the Vorraan Junction on open channels. Warlord Veskaar moved 7 ships to the edge of Clan Thoric's space. Warlord Veskaar lost the border, lost the claim, and then this was the part that burned. Reframed the loss on an open channel where the whole compact could hear him do it, the way a man explains a wound to prove it didn't hurt. They had read it as a young clan reaching past its grip. Veskaar read it differently. He read it as a map, because here was the thing none of them had said aloud, the thing buried on page 41 between a casualty count and a hull manifest. Clan Drennach held the Vorraan Junction now, held it by force, and the authorization. Kor had been purged before the station fell. Warlord Korach had a station. He did not have a claim. The compact ledger recorded the junction as belonging to no one, empty in the way a hand is empty after it closes on smoke. Korach had spent ships and warriors and the goodwill of 2 clans to take a thing that, in the only ledger that counted, he did not own. And a junction that owns nothing still has to be fed. Veskaar set the slate down. Outside, a gantry crane swung a dorsal plate the length of 3 battle cruisers across the face of the largest dry dock, and the floods caught it, and for a moment the plate hung in the dark, like a blade waiting to be set in a hilt. His hulls, his pace. No other clan could build the way Keaval built. Fast, cheap, hungry, 3 ships rising in the time it took Cathara to lay 1 keel with ceremony. The old warlord sneered at the pace. Let them. The galaxy did not weigh how long a ship took to build. It weighed how many you could put in the lane. He would put them in the lane. The reach had been forming in him for 6 days, since the Vorraan record entered the archive, and it had the clean geometry of all his best mistakes. Korach holds the junction. The junction is hollow. The corridors that feed it are therefore the leverage. Take a feeder, and you do not have to take the station, because a station no one can supply is a monument, not a fortress. The Sevrokk Corridor ran along the old Vesk approach into Drennach's outer transit web, a secondary lane that nobody had cared about in 40 years and that, 3 weeks ago, had become the only quiet artery into a junction Korach could not afford to lose face over. Take Sevrokk. Make Korach defend a thing he had just bled to win. Put it in a battle record. Close challenge by the book, legal standing, his name on a victory in the same archive that held his humiliation, and let the compact read that differently too. It was clean. It sounded clean. Veskaar had learned, in 90 years, that the cleanest plans were the ones that had something wrong with them he could not yet see. He chose not to look for it. He went down to the yards because a warlord who would not walk his own ships had no business sending them to die. The lift let him out at the floor of Dry Dock 4 into a wall of sound, the shriek of seam welders, the bass cough of the grate. Presses 2 bays over, the rolling industrial thunder that on Kaval passed for quiet. Crews stopped and struck their chests as he passed, and he answered each one with a look because his warriors were owed a look from the warlord they built for. He moved fast. He always moved fast. Stillness felt to Veskaar like a debt accruing. Master. Shipwright Vennek met him at the keel line of the half-built cruiser, and the shipwright did not strike his chest because Vennek was old enough and good enough that the gesture would have been theater between them, and they both knew it. Vennek was a slab of a Drakkar gone gray at the plating, with hands burned smooth across the knuckles from a century of laying his palm against alloy to feel for what his eyes might miss. He stood the way he always stood, half-turned from whatever you were looking at, as if the ship were a thing he was keeping an eye on rather than building. "Warlord Veskaar," Vennek said. "Tell me she's ahead of schedule. She's ahead of schedule." A pause that lasted exactly 1 beat too long. "Everything is ahead of schedule." Veskaar laid his hand on the new hull. It was warm from the day's work, and it rang faintly under his palm, the deep, healthy note of good Drakkar metal, and he was satisfied. He was a warlord, not a shipwright. He knew the sound a hull should make, and this hull made it. What he did not know, what no part of him was built to hear, was that the note was a quarter-tone shallow, and that Vennek had heard it on the last 4 keels, and that the dorsal, plating coming off the new presses, carried a grain that ran wrong under the light, finer than speck and brighter than it should be, sourced from an ore line whose manifests had been clean for 11 months, in which Vennek had stopped being able to fully trace somewhere past the 3rd supplier. The shipwright had brought it up once, obliquely, in the language men use when they are not yet sure they are seeing a thing. He had said the alloy was taking the cold differently. Veskaar had heard the alloy is fine, the cold is the problem, because that was the sentence he needed, and Vennek had watched him hear it, and had not pushed. He did not push now. He stood with his weight back on his heels, watching the hull the way you watch a thing you do not trust, and he let the warlord lay his hand on it and be satisfied. "How many can I have in the lane in 9 days?" Veskaar said. "Not a question. 11, fully crewed. 14 if you'll take 4 of them green." Vennek's burned hands hung at his sides. "I'd give you the 11. The 4, I'd hold them. There's nothing I can put a name to. I'd just hold them. You'd hold everything. That's why you build them and I sail them." It came out harder than he meant it, and Veskaar heard the seam in his own voice, the place where the confidence thinned over, the want. He let it stand. A warlord who softened a thing he'd already said was a warlord teaching his people that his words could be walked back. 11 and 4. "I'll take the 4. Vennek looked at him a moment longer. Then he struck his chest after, all slow, which from Vennek was not deference. It was the gesture a man makes when he has said his piece and intends later to be on the record as having said it. Veskaar left the yards faster than he'd entered them. He told himself it was urgency. It had the shape of urgency. Underneath it ran the other thing, the thing he would not name even alone, which was that down on the floor with his hand on the metal he had felt, for 1 bad second, that he did not understand his own ships, and that the safest place from that feeling was motion. The inner circle met in a room with no chairs, because Warlord Veskaar believed a decision made sitting down was a decision already half asleep. There were 4 of them, and there should have been more, and the gap where the others should have stood was its own argument. A clan that has just lost a border does not have a full council. It has the ones who stayed. Elder Hesk had stayed. Hesk was the oldest living thing in Clan Vesk. 200 years of border wars folded into a frame. Gone narrow with age, and he had counseled 3 warlords before this one and buried 2 of them. When he spoke slowly, and Veskaar had learned to dread the slowness because Hesk was never slow from weakness. He was slow the way a man is slow setting a trap he expects you to walk into anyway. "You want to reach for Sevrokk," Hesk said. He had read the same record. He had reached the same page 41. 9 days after the archive recorded the last reach. 8 by the time the hulls are crewed. 8. Hesk let it sit. The clan that reaches twice in a month is the clan the other 4 stop calling young and start calling reckless. Those are different words, Warlord. The first one waits to see what you become, the second one decides. And the clan that does nothing, Veskaar said, after losing a border on open channels. What do they call that one? Patient. They call it finished, Hesk. The heat was up in him now, and he let it climb because in front of the circle, heat was a tool, heat was a thing they could follow. Warlord Morvac is patient. Morvac has been patient through 2 successions and never once held the Overlord's title, and the whole compact respects him for it. And do you know what patience has bought Clan Morvac in 300 years? Nothing. A reputation. A reputation is what they hang on the wall when there's no body to bury. He stopped himself 1 word short of the thing he was actually saying, which was, I cannot afford to be respected, I can only afford to be feared, because respect is for clans with stone under them, and I have alloy. The senior captain spoke for the first time. Senior Captain Sevrokk was 60 years of border duty and had the stillness Veskaar lacked and envied, a low-fire competence that asked no audience. He had flown the worst of the Vorraan Reach and brought back what could be brought back, and he had not said a word about it on any channel, open or closed, which was the whole reason Veskaar trusted him. Tell me the holding force, Sevrokk said. To the point, always, small. Korak won't garrison Sevrokk heavy. The corridor's worth nothing to him until someone wants it, and the only one who wants it is us. By the time he reads the want, we hold the control platform. Veskaar pulled the lane up on the wall, the Sevrokk run laid out in hard, cold light, the transit control platform a single bright node where the corridor narrowed. He'll leave it to a senior officer under his authority and stay off the record, same as he did at Vorraan. That's the gift. He commands through someone else. The someone else takes the loss, and Korak is never on the field to lose anything but tonnage he's already decided he can spend. So I make him spend it. And if the corridor's worth nothing to him, Sevrokk said, what's it worth to us? The room went quiet under the welder's distant thunder. It was the right question. It was Hesk's question said in fewer words, and it landed harder for the economy of it. And for a moment Veskaar stood inside the truth of it, that he was reaching for a lane that fed a junction that owned nothing, that the leverage might be a shape with no weight in it, that he had built the whole geometry out of a hollow. Then he stepped over it, the way he had stepped over the wrong note in the hull. It's worth a battle record with my name on a win, Veskaar said. It's worth the archive reading Veskaar took the day after Veskaar lost. Half the succession is what's true, and half is what the other 4 believe is true. And right now, all 4 believe I overreach and break. I'm going to hand them a page where I reach and take. That's what it's worth. The corridor is the excuse. The record is the reach. He had not meant to say it that plainly. He saw Hesk's eyes change, not softening. The old elder did not soften, but registering. And he understood that he had just shown the circle the seam himself had told them, that the war was for the archive and not the lane, and that some of them would respect the honesty and some would mark it as the moment the warlord admitted he was fighting his own reputation instead of an enemy. The man who had handed him the clan would never have said it. Warlord Vorraan had ruled Clan Vesk for 40 years on the principle that a warlord's wants were his own, and a warlord's reasons died with him, and he had handed Veskaar a clan that was poorer and smaller than its rivals and more feared than either, fear built entirely out of the things Vorraan never explained. Vorraan would have read the Vorraan record and waited a year. He would have let the corridor lie until someone else wanted it, until the want was not his, until the reach could be disguised as a response. He would have been patient and quiet and alive in a way Veskaar did not know how to be, and he would have been right, and Veskaar, standing in the room with no chairs, with the seam showing in his own voice, chose to be himself instead. He gave the order. Vorrgaan's ghost did not argue. Ghosts never did. That was their advantage. Senior Captain Sevrokk takes the reach, Veskaar said. 11 crude, 4 green. Closed challenge to Warlord Korak. By the book, every word legal. Nothing on an open channel this time. Nothing they can laugh at. We do this one clean. Elder Hesk struck his chest. The slow strike, the on-the-record strike. Once, Warlord. And then I execute, he said, which was the formula, which meant he had used his one objection and would not raise it again. I've said it. You move too early. You'll move too early one time too many, and the clan that's reading you will be ready for it, and it won't be Sevrokk that costs you. It'll be the one after Sevrokk, the one you reach for because this one worked. He let his hand fall. Now I execute. Now you execute, Veskaar agreed, and felt the relief of it like cold water, the relief of having converted the fear in the yards into a thing with a heading. Sevrokk was already turning for the lift, already gone in his mind to the lane, and Veskaar watched the one man he trusted walk out to fly the reach the oldest man he trusted had just warned him against. And he held both of those facts in his chest at once, and he did not let either one slow him down. The challenge went out on a closed band at the 11th hour, and Warlord Korak's silence on every open channel came back as acceptance, exactly as the mechanic required, exactly as Veskaar had known it would. Korak said nothing. Korak was 3 systems away on Korath and would remain there, his name nowhere near the field. His answer delivered in the only language he ever used, a holding force, already moving, commanded by someone whose loss would not be his. This is what the archive would later record in the flat grammar of a battle record. And this is what Warlord Veskaar reconstructed in the command hall on Kaaval as the fragments came in, leaning into the cold light of the lane display with his fists on the rail and his whole clan's reach hanging out there in the dark where he could not reach it back. The Vesk force came into the Sevrokk Corridor in a staggered line, Senior Captain Serokk's flag the Vorraan at the spear point, the 11 crude hulls tight and the 4 green ones held a half-burn back as Sevrokk had insisted, against Veskaar's instinct and to Veskaar's later gratitude. The corridor narrowed toward the transit control platform, an old compact-era structure squatting at the lane's throat, and the Drennach holding force was waiting in the narrows the way Korak's forces always waited. Small, exactly sized, not one ship more than the target was worth, 5 vessels against 15. Senior Commander Drennach, commanding from a Drakast-class cruiser called the Korast, under Warlord Korak's authority, off Korak's record, holding a lane his warlord had already decided he could afford to lose. Veskaar saw the count come. In and for one bright, vicious second he believed it was already over. It was not already over. Senior Commander Drennach had read the same hollow Veskaar had read, and read it the other way. A corridor worth nothing did not need to be saved. It needed to be made expensive. Drennach did not form a line. He fed his 5 ships into the narrows where the platform's old siege batteries still answered to the holding force, and he turned a feeder lane that fed nothing into a throat with teeth, and he made Clan Vesk pay for every length of it. The transmissions came to Kaaval in fragments, and Veskaar built the battle out of them with the part of his mind that had flown 40 years of borders before they made him a warlord. Vorraan to all hulls. Platform batteries. Live, they kept the core hot. The platform was supposed to be a prize. It became a gun. The Drennach siege rounds came up out of the narrows, and the lead Vesk cruiser, the Drevos, took one through the forward plating, and Veskaar heard the transmission cut and knew before the after fragment confirmed it what that meant. That somewhere out there in the cold, 140 of his warriors had stopped being warriors and started being debris, and that he had ordered it, here, in a room with no chairs, 8 days ago. Drevos is gone. Drevos is gone. Forward. Line break to the platform, we take it close or we don't take it. They took it close. Veskaar could not see this part. No camera reached the inside of the Sevrokk platform, and the fragments that came back were Serokk's voice gone flat with the work of command, and later, the after-action filed by the boarding officers who lived. So Veskaar did what a warlord does when the field goes dark. He imagined it, because to not imagine it was to abandon his warriors to a silence he had sent them into. He built it behind his eyes, the Vesk boarding pods clamping onto the platforms. Flank, 200 tons of armored steel biting old compact alloy. The breach. The corridors beyond the breach, narrow and dark and held, because Drennach had put warriors inside the platform, and those warriors had been told to make it expensive. And they did. Amber blood on the deck of the Sevrokk platform, Drakkar on both sides. And so it was all Amber, Vesk, and Drennach bleeding the same color into the same grated floor until you could not have told by the blood which clan a body had died for. The boarding officers after action would record it. Without weight the way after actions did. Heavy resistance, close quarters, the holding force did not yield the control deck. What it would not record was the shipwright's son, Korvik. A young warrior of Clan Vesk, barely past his ritual scars, who Master Shipwright Drennach had sent to the line 2 years ago, and who had been aboard the Vorraan because Sevrokk had a way of collecting the good ones. He went into the platform with the second pod, and he died on the control deck holding a corridor junction so the warriors behind him could reach the core, and he bled out amber against a compact bulkhead with a Drennach blade still in him, and the warrior who put it there, a Drennach line soldier whose name no record would ever carry, died of the same wound a breath later when Korvik, dying, did not let go. They were found that way. 2 warriors of 2 clans locked at the throat in a lane that fed a junction that owned nothing, their blood gone to the same amber on the same floor. And that was the cost the battle record would total in a number, and Veskaar would read as a number and Drennach would read as a name. The control platform fell at the 40th minute. Senior Commander Drennach did not survive it. He took the Korast into the Narrows when the platform was already lost, when a senior officer under his warlord's authority might have withdrawn and been forgiven, and he did not withdraw, because Korak's authority meant his decisions were Korak's decisions, and Drennach had decided that a corridor made expensive enough might still teach Clan Vesk not to reach again. He died doing it. The Korast went into the Vesk line and took the Vorrann's return fire amidships and broke, and Senior Commander Drennach of Clan Drennach died at his command rail in the dark with amber on the deck of his own bridge, having spent 5 ships and himself to make Warlord Veskaar's clean win cost 4 hulls and 300 warriors in a thing. Veskaar would not understand this part for some time, a thing that was not measured in tonnage at all, because the 4 green hulls held back. Sevrokk had insisted on it, and it had saved the reach, the half-burn of reserve that let the line break and reform. But 2 of the 4, brought up at the last to seal the corridor, took siege fire that the manifest said they should have shrugged off. Light rounds, off-axis, the kind of hit a Vorath-class plate was built to turn, and one of them, the Rakon, did not turn it. The round went in where it should have skated, and the hull came apart along a seam that good Drakkar metal does not have, and the after fragment that reached Kaval carried Sevrok's voice saying a thing Veskaar would replay in the dark for a long time. Rakon's plating failed cold. Warlord. Her plating failed cold. That wasn't a kill shot. The plating failed cold. Veskaar stood at the rail in the command hall, and the words went through him and found the bad second from the yards, the quarter tone he had not been able to hear. Drennach's burned hand and the alloy that took the cold differently, and for an instant the whole hollow geometry tilted and showed him an edge he had not known was there. Something was wrong with his hulls. Not the 4 green ones. All of them. Something in the metal. Something in the ore line. Something that turned a glancing round into a gutted ship and that he had laid his own palm against and called good. He did not know what it was. He could not name it. He suspected, for one. Cold breath, he suspected the border, suspected that Vorraan had not simply been lost but known, that someone had read his patrol schedules off a leak he could not trace, and that the same someone might have reached his ore line too. And the suspicion found no purchase. There was no thread in his hand, only the shape of a thread, only the sense that an eye that knew where to look had been looking at Clan Vesk for longer than Clan Vesk had been looking back. He let it go, not because he wanted to. Because there was nothing to hold. The Sevrokk Corridor was his. The control platform was his. The battle record would run shorter than Vorraan's, and it would carry, on its first page, the only sentence Veskaar had reached for. Clan Vesk took the lane. It had cost 4 hulls and 300 warriors and a shipwright's son and a question Veskaar could not afford to answer, and it had won him a corridor into a junction that owned nothing, held by a warlord who had spent 5 ships to teach him a lesson he was already, in the deepest unlit part of himself, beginning to learn. He had reached. He had taken. The archive would say so. He did not yet let himself ask what he had taken. Senior Captain Tarak came home 3 days later with the Vorraan venting atmosphere from a wound down her flank and his command crew down a third, and he walked off the lift onto the command level of the Kaval Citadel under his own power with a field seal on his shoulder and amber dried black at the edge of it where the seal had not quite held. Warlord Veskaar met him at the lift. A warlord who would not meet the captain he'd sent to bleed had no business sending the next one. "It's recorded," Tarak said. He did not strike his chest, he was too tired and they were past it. "Filed clean. Closed challenge, legal standing, the archive has it, you got your page. I got my page." Tarak looked at him with the low, steady fire that asked no audience, and said the thing he had not put on any channel. "The Hragan didn't die to Drennach, Warlord. She died to her own plating. I've sailed 40 years, and I've never seen good. Metal come apart like that off a glancing round. Whatever's wrong with the yards, it's in the hulls you're going to send out next, and the one after that." He let it sit, the way Hesk let things sit, the way the old men did when they wanted you to feel the floor under a thing. "I'll fly whatever you build, but you should find out what you're building before you build more of it." It was the second warning. Venax was the first, half-turned and unpushed on the floor of Drydock 4. Hesk's was the third in spirit. If not in order, the U moved too early that was about to come true in a shape the old elder hadn't predicted. And Warlord Veskaar stood on the command level of his young world with the yards burning orange below him and 2 of his most trusted men telling him the same thing in different rooms. "Stop. Look at what you have. Understand it before you spend it." And he felt the pull of it, the sane, heavy pull toward the thing Vorgan would have done. Then he turned to the lane display, still lit with the Sevrokk run, the corridor now Vesk held and bright, and he saw past it the way he always saw past things, to the next narrow node where a second feeder ran into Korak's transit web from the far side. The Hadran approach, ungarrisoned, undefended, worth nothing until someone wanted it. He wanted it. "Korak has to defend Vorraan now or admit it's hollow," Veskaar said, and the heat was back up in him, the want climbing over the fear, the motion closing like a hand over the bad second from the yards. "He's exposed on the Sevrokk side. If I take Hadran before he reinforces, he's defending a junction on 2 fronts that he can't supply on either, and the whole compact watches Clan Drennach bleed to hold a station that owns nothing." He was already moving toward the council room, the room with no chairs, already gone in his mind to the next reach. "Get the Vorraan sealed and find me Vennek. I want every hull he'll give me, green and crude both, and I want them in the Hadran. Lane before Korak reads the want." "Warlord," Tarak started, the warning still in his throat. "I heard you. I heard all of you." Veskaar stopped at the threshold and looked back at the captain he had sent to bleed and would send again, and for one unguarded second the seam showed all the way through, the young clan and the burning yards and the metal he did not understand. And the 4 other warlords reading him in the archive, all of it visible at once in a face that had stopped, briefly, performing. "I can't stop and look, Tarak. The day I stop and look is the day they all see what I'm standing on. The only thing holding this clan up is that I keep moving faster than the ground." He turned for the council room. "Send the challenge, Warlord," Veskaar said, and went to make the next reach before the last one had finished bleeding. End of episode 18, and thank you for watching.